The Panavia Tornado was designed and built through the cooperation of a number of nations, including the UK, Germany, Italy and the Netherlands. The Tornado entered Royal Air Force service in 1980 as the Gr.Mk.I, but didn't face its combat debut until a decade later, when, in 1991, they took part in Operation GRANBY, which was the British contribution to the Gulf War. Repainted in desert pink to help camouflage the aircraft, they were used to great success to neutralise enemy ground defences using both guided and unguided munitions. The Tornado was designed with variable geometry wings, which swept back to achieve high speeds and extended to improve slower speed handling. Capable of reaching over Mach 2 and armed with not only an internally mounted 27mm cannon, but also a variety of air-to-air and air-to-ground munitions, the Tornado became part of the backbone of the RAF's defensive and offensive aircraft. Receiving many upgrades over its long service life, it was finally withdrawn from the RAF in 2019. Hey guys, Matt from Model Minutes here, and join me in this video as I build and review the Panavia Tornado Gr.Mk.I in 1:144 scale from Academy. I completed an unboxing review on this kit a little while ago, and if you'd like more information on what's included in the kit and how the parts look, then you can find that video on my channel. For this one though, I'll be focusing on the quality of the build and what it looks like at the end. As always, before I start, please remember that adult supervision may be required when building model kits due to the use of sharp tools and toxic paints and chemicals. Academy recommends this one to those aged 14 and over. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. Throughout this build, I will be removing the parts from the sprue using either my cutters or a sharp knife. The excess plastic can then be sanded smooth using a file or carefully cut away. I removed the fuselage halves and wings, but before I cemented them together I added some sticky tack in the nose of the model. This extra weight will help the model stand properly on its wheels and prevent it from sitting on its tail. The wings have this gearing system moulded into them, which allows you to swing them backwards and forwards like the real aircraft, so you must make sure that you don't actually cement them in place. The upper and lower fuselage parts will hold them in place, so be careful with your glue. I'm using Tamiya extra thin cement here, which will flow along the seams of the two fuselage parts and help them bond together. With that done, the vertical tail surface can be cemented into place. It has two locating holes which it slots into. The horizontal tail parts are added in a similar way, being cemented into slots in the sides of the model. The air intakes come as separate parts and need to be glued into place at the front of the model. Make sure you get these the right way around. And with that done, the majority of the build is pretty much complete, with only a few smaller details including the landing gear and missiles to add later. Not a complicated one to do, is it? Let's try and get some painting done. I mixed up various amounts of Tamiya XF59 Desert Yellow Acrylic, Humbrol 60 Matte Scarlet, Humbrol 24 Trainer Yellow, and Tamiya X28 acrylic thinners to help it flow. This was done until I had a desert pink kind of paint. I did this by eye until it looked about right. I then brushed this over the entire model. I also used this paint to cover the smaller parts still on the sprue, which included the landing gear covers and the cockpit canopy. I used Humbrol Matte Black number 33 to paint the wheels which were still on their sprue. I then cut the engine exhausts from the sprue and cemented them into their slots at the rear of the model. Humbrol 53 Gunmetal Grey was used to paint these metallic areas around the exhaust nozzles. I did this carefully with a fine paintbrush. I carefully painted the nose cone with the black paint as previously used, and then moved on to paint the cockpit area as well. The pylons under the wings were then cemented into place. Generally, the build is going okay, but on closer inspection of the desert pink you can see that it's started to chip in places and has dried with varying tones. It's even dried in such a way that the wings can't swing anymore. The painting isn't as neat as I'd like either. I'm not happy with this and will need to fix it. But at the time I started this kit, I didn't have the motivation to do so. Everything you've just seen me do is during the summer of 2019, but sadly this became one of those kits that got put back in the box and left on the shelf until a future date. A whole year later and it's now autumn 2020. My motivation for this model has now returned, but I still need to address all those previous issues. I feel that the best way to start to fix them is by stripping that paint and starting again. I popped the model into some isopropyl alcohol and left it for about 20 minutes to soak. I could then remove it and carefully brush off all that paint. For more information on how to strip paint from your models, take a look on the tutorial I made on this topic. After a while, the majority of the paint has been removed, and I feel it's at an appropriate point where I can begin again. Although by this point I now own an airbrush, I thought that as I started this model by hand painting, I should finish it the same way. I'm going to address the paint issue and get a uniform colour by using this product from Extra Acrylics. It's XA1032 Gulf War Desert Pink, which I bought specially for this project. Speaking of buying paints and things, the reason I can afford to do this is through the generous support of my patrons over on Patreon and my channel members here on YouTube. A massive thank you to these guys. If you would like to join these people on screen and get the exclusive benefits including early access to videos and behind the scenes stuff, take a look at the links in the descriptions on how you can become a patron or a channel member. I first painted the cockpit area and nose cone with Humbrol 33 matte black once again. Whilst that paint was drying, I masked the cockpit using some 2mm masking tape. This was quite fiddly, but as you can see I got there in the end. I'm hoping this will make neater lines than when I was painting by hand. I glued the cockpit canopy into place using PVA glue, which will dry clear. I also masked the black nose cone and anti-glare panel on the top of the fuselage, ready for the desert pink paint. I thinned it with Tamiya X20A acrylic thinners to help it flow and avoid leaving brush strokes. It was then applied to the entire model. It goes on quite well, if a little thinly, so about 3 or 4 layers were needed. It was also slightly glossy, which I wasn't expecting, but that's not a bad thing. The missiles were painted on the sprue using Tamiya XF2 matte white, which was thinned with Tamiya thinners again. About 2 or 3 layers were needed on these parts. Humbrol 56 aluminium acrylic was painted onto the landing gear legs and also the exhaust areas on the model. Again, as before, I did this carefully by hand to get the paint in the right places. With the paint dry, I carefully removed the masking tape. It's done an okay job, but there is a little paint bleed in places, which I will sort out by covering it up with a little more black paint. As mentioned previously, the desert pink paint is a little glossy, so I will forego my normal gloss clear layer and just apply the decal straight on top. A gloss layer helps to prevent air bubbles under the plastic decal film, which is what causes the silvering effect that you can get with matte paints. I soaked the decal sheet in warm water and then allowed the transfers to release from the backing paper. I'm not a fan of Academy's decals, as I find the printing to be a little hit and miss, but the main issue is the thickness of the film and its unwillingness to conform to details. To that end, I'm using Humbrol Decal Fix as my setting solution on this kit, as it is a little more aggressive and should help to soften them a bit. I did find that during the application process, some of the transfers broke, so that was annoying. I managed to persevere, but it was a little infuriating. Possibly the worst step of the entire build. The only positive is that there are so few decals that you don't have to suffer it for a long time. Whilst they are curing, I cut the nose wheel covers into 3 parts, following the moulded lines. If you wanted to depict the landing gear raised, all you would have to do is cement this part in place, but because I want the wheels down, I have to cut it up. I used Revell contactor cement to glue the landing gear leg into its hole, which was previously painted with Humbrol 56 aluminium. The gear covers were then also added. I repeated the process for the main landing gear, cementing the leg into place and then the door. The wheels can then be carefully added onto their legs. I've already painted the wheel centres with the same aluminium paint, but all of this was a bit fiddly. The missiles can now be cemented onto their underwing pylons. Again, this was fiddly, as they didn't seem to want to sit quite right. Humbrol 49 matte varnish was thinned with hot water to try and avoid leaving that white residue. I brushed it onto the model and allowed it to dry. My homemade enamel panel line wash was carefully applied to the recessed details to add some contrast and highlight them. I really thinned the wash down this time though, to try and make it less obvious, especially in such a small scale. I also did a tutorial on how to make this wash, so for more information take a look at that video. With everything dry, the masking tape on the cockpit canopy can now be removed. As this is a tiny part, and due to some heavy-handedness on my part, I managed to pull the canopy off the model. Not to worry, it was easy enough to glue it back into place. I added a little weathering. I'd seen on some pictures of aircraft from the time that there was often some sort of exhaust staining on the tail fin. To do this, I took a black pastel and shaved off some dust using a knife. It was carefully brushed into the correct areas until it looked like the stains in the pictures. And as far as I'm concerned, it's now finished. So, what do I think of this kit? Well, it's okay for a low-stress pocket money build, perhaps as a practice piece to get some experience in, but I don't really think it's a serious model. The details look to be generally okay, and the fit of the parts wasn't bad either. It is lacking detail in places, particularly in the cockpit area. The inclusion of crew figures would have been nice so that I could display this in a flying pose, but alas there aren't any. The decals, although usable, are not great. Being thick and papery, they tore during application and the printing is less than perfect. The instructions were easy to follow, but being printed in black and white was not ideal. As this only comes with one paint scheme though, and it being mostly just one colour overall, it wasn't a really issue having black and white instructions. As mentioned in the unboxing review video, it was a little annoying that the images on the box don't represent the kit inside. The box featured a green and grey camouflage scheme, whereas the one included is for this desert pink version. That being said, the version depicted here is for a Tornado Gr.Mk.I of 15th Squadron Royal Air Force as used in Operation GRANBY during the Gulf War of 1991. But you wouldn't know that from the information on the box or in the instructions as it's not included. I had to look that up. Now, bearing in mind that this is 1 to 144th scale, all of these close-ups are rather unflattering. It doesn't look too bad from normal viewing distances, but up close there are certainly some issues which are noticeable. There is a seam between the upper and lower fuselage halves, which I left as it didn't really bother me, but if you're a perfectionist you might want to address that. Also, there are some gaps here and there which you can spot close up, but not from far away. Also, having that swing wing design feature is pretty cool, adding some play value. But if you included the missiles under the wings, they just look weird. As in real life they would rotate to be in line with the airflow. Here though, they just stick out and look bizarre. You're pretty much left with the only option to either have the wings out straight, or swept back when building this then. Enough of that though. Let's talk about the stats and the history of the kit. It would seem that the tooling of this kit dates from 1983, so naturally, the issues I've mentioned previously do make a little sense, as the quality of this kit is not up to the standard expected today. The kit has been released a number of times since 1983, even making a brief appearance in the Revell range in 1987, but the particular version I have here dates from 2013. I was fortunate enough to buy this from a model shop for £2.95, which is an incredibly good price. Online sellers seem to be retailing this model kit for anywhere between £3.50 and £6 here in the UK at the time this video was made. That's quite a varied price range, and if I were you, I would be looking for the cheapest option, as it's certainly not worth £6 in this reviewer's opinion. But I think it's probably time to wrap this one up now. This is not the best kit in the world. If you can find it at a low price, it might be worth getting for a bit of fun though. At the end of the day, I'm glad that I managed to finish this one even if it took me over a year to get round to doing so. Anyway, let me know what you think of this build in the comments below. Would you be tempted to get one of these for yourself? Don't forget that you can also leave a suggestion for any other videos you might like to see. You can connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook and Discord. Subscribe with notifications on to see more modelling content, and click that like button if you enjoyed this video. Finally, a massive thank you to you for watching, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.